Have you ever woken up and felt like you weren't quite yourself? Not in pain, not seriously ill, just something feels off. Vague, hard to explain, a light dizziness, a bit unsteady, or a sense that your mind is wrapped in fog. If you're over 60, pay attention to that moment. Because sometimes, small changes like that are early signals, your body's quiet warning, that something serious may be building up. At the elderly way, we don't paint everything as a tragedy, but we also don't ignore the little things just because they haven't turned into a real problem yet. We choose to face reality and act smart. Here's the truth. Strokes don't always begin with sharp pain or sudden collapse. They can start on an ordinary morning when old habits like drinking coffee on an empty stomach, jumping out of bed too fast, or forgetting to hydrate slowly start to wear down the brain's circulation, silently. We can't prevent every risk, but we can do something better, recognize early signs and adjust in time. In today's video, I'll walk you through 7 common morning habits among older adults, habits that might be quietly harming the brain. No judgment here, just clear information, simple advice, and easy tips you can start using as soon as tomorrow morning. If you're looking for a place where people your age share real experiences, no sugarcoating, no preaching, welcome to the elderly way. We're not just living longer, we're living on purpose. Don't forget to leave a comment if you've ever felt that something off sensation after waking up. What you share today might be the timely reminder someone else needs tomorrow. Habit 1. Getting out of bed too quickly. After a long night of rest, your blood pressure and heart rate are at their lowest. Blood circulation slows down, especially to the brain. This is a completely natural mechanism when your body is in a deep sleep state. But when you wake up and immediately stand up, the sudden change in posture catches your body off guard. As a result, the amount of blood reaching the brain temporarily drops, leading to dizziness, lightheadedness, loss of balance, or even brief fainting. This phenomenon is called orthostatic hypotension. It's not dangerous if it only happens once in a while, but if it occurs frequently, especially in the morning, it could be a sign that your cardiovascular system or autonomic nervous system isn't functioning as efficiently as it should. According to a study published in the journal Hypertension, over 20% of Americans over the age of 60 experience orthostatic hypotension, and nearly half of them don't realize their symptoms are connected to standing up too quickly. Another study, published in the Journal of Gerontology, found that people who suffer from early morning blood pressure drops have a 40% higher risk of falling at home within a year. For older adults, falls don't just mean bruises or broken bones. They can reduce quality of life, lead to loss of independence, and are one of the main reasons for extended hospital stays. The good news is that this condition can be completely prevented by changing one simple morning habit. When you first open your eyes, give yourself 30 to 60 seconds to let your body adjust. Take 3 deep breaths while still lying down, then slowly shift to a seated position. Place both feet on the floor and wait at least 20 to 30 seconds before standing up. If you've ever felt dizzy during this transition, you might need even more time to let your blood pressure stabilize. Additionally, if you're taking medications like diuretics, high blood pressure meds, or vasodilators, your risk of orthostatic hypotension is higher. In this case, you should talk to your doctor to review your dosage and timing. Don't adjust your medication on your own, but also don't ignore the warning signs your body is giving you. Starting your morning slowly and mindfully doesn't just prevent falls. It helps protect oxygen flow to your brain, improves alertness, and allows you to begin your day more safely. Habit 2. Not drinking water after waking up. When you wake up in the morning, do you drink water? Or do you go straight to the bathroom, make coffee, take your medication, all without putting a single drop of water into your body? Many older adults start their day mildly dehydrated without even realizing it. While you sleep for 6 to 8 hours, your body is still at work. You breathe, You lose a bit of sweat through your skin, and you lose moisture through your breath. But you're not replenishing any fluids during that entire time. As a result, by the time you wake up, your fluid levels are already down, and this especially affects your brain, which is made up of about 75% water. When the body lacks water, your blood becomes thicker, your circulation slows down, and your ability to deliver oxygen to tissues, especially brain tissue, decreases. That's why so many people feel groggy, mentally foggy, or slow to react during the first 30 to 60 minutes of the morning, without any obvious reason. This is even more dangerous for people with a history of high blood pressure, heart disease, or those taking diuretics, since they lose even more water during the night. A study published in the European Journal of Neurology showed that mild dehydration in the morning can increase blood viscosity and disrupt cerebral microcirculation, raising the risk of transient ischemic attacks, TIAs, and minor strokes, especially in people over 60. The good news is, you can fix this with one simple action. Drink a glass of room temperature water within 10 minutes of waking up, before coffee, tea, or any medication. Water naturally thins your blood, kickstarts your digestive system, and delivers the hydration your central nervous system needs. That one glass can help you feel more alert and also helps your morning medications absorb more effectively. If you take blood pressure meds, statins, or blood thinners, starting your day well hydrated can reduce side effects like dizziness, headaches, or unusual fatigue. For older adults at risk of stroke, keeping your hydration level steady is one of the most important ways to protect your brain. If drinking water first thing in the morning feels hard, place a glass of water on your nightstand the night before. You can add a slice of lemon or cucumber if you prefer a hint of flavor. The key is to make this a daily habit, because the long-term benefits are what truly change your life. Habit 3. Eating too much salt at breakfast without even realizing it. Have you ever thought your breakfast was pretty healthy? A slice of whole grain bread, a bowl of cereal, maybe a couple of quick-fried eggs sounds fine, right? But here's what most people don't realize. That seemingly normal breakfast can pack more salt than the recommended daily limit for older adults. The issue is that salt doesn't just come from the shaker on your table. It hides in processed foods we eat every day, packaged breakfast sandwiches, salted butter, sliced cheese, whole grain cereals that are still processed, even those instant oatmeal packets labeled apple cinnamon. According to the American Heart Association, adults over 60 should limit sodium intake to less than 500 mg per day to protect heart and brain health. But just one breakfast with 2 slices of white bread, about 300 mg, 1 slice of cheese, 250 mg, and 1 serving of packaged cereal, over 200 mg, can easily top 750 mg. That's half your daily salt limit, all before noon. Here's the kicker. In the morning, your body naturally experiences a rise in blood pressure. It's a physiological response to wake up your organs and get them going. But if you consume a high dose of salt right when your blood pressure is already spiking, you're just adding more pressure on top of it. That extra strain hits the tiny blood vessels in the brain, which, with age, are thinner and less elastic, increasing the risk of stroke, memory loss, and cognitive decline. The good news: you don't have to give up your favorite breakfast foods, just rethink how you choose them. Instead of packaged cereal, try plain rolled oats cooked at home, topped with fresh fruit or unsalted nuts. Instead of fried eggs with cheese, go for boiled eggs with fresh butter or a few slices of avocado. If you eat bread, read the label carefully. Pick one with less than 150 mg of sodium per serving. A balanced breakfast with controlled salt levels can help your brain start the day in a steadier state. Don't let routine blind you. Many foods that don't taste salty still contain high levels of sodium, especially when they're processed. Make it a habit to check food labels and track your sodium intake for just 1 week. Do it once, and you'll start to see what's quietly affecting your brain health. Habit 4. Drinking coffee on an empty stomach. For many people, the morning doesn't really start until they've got a hot cup of coffee in hand. This habit feels so normal that it seems harmless. But if you're drinking coffee before eating anything, especially when your stomach is completely empty, you might be putting subtle stress on your cardiovascular and nervous systems without even realizing it. Coffee stimulates the central nervous system almost instantly, thanks to its caffeine content. Without any food in your stomach to act as a buffer, caffeine enters your bloodstream more quickly. This causes a spike in adrenaline levels, which raises your heart rate, increases blood pressure, and causes blood vessels to constrict. For younger people, this reaction might just cause a bit of jitteriness. But for those over 60, whose blood vessels are less flexible and whose hearts work harder, these changes can raise the risk of heart rhythm disturbances, especially atrial fibrillation in those with a history of heart issues. Reflexive blood pressure drops after a sudden decrease in adrenaline, triggering a transient ischemic attack, TIA or mini-stroke, in those with weak cerebral circulation. A study from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health found that drinking coffee on an empty stomach significantly increases short-term systolic blood pressure response. And this could be problematic if you're taking blood pressure or heart medications. That said, you don't need to give up coffee. Coffee contains antioxidants and can offer health benefits for older adults when consumed in moderation. The key lies in when and how you drink it. Start your morning with a glass of plain water. Then eat a light breakfast, maybe a boiled egg, a slice of whole grain bread, or a few apple slices with peanut butter. Only after that, once your stomach has a buffer and your blood pressure has stabilized from the overnight rest, should you have your coffee. Limit it to 1 cup, about 8 oz, and avoid loading it with heavy cream and sugar. If you find yourself needing more than 1 cup to feel awake, the issue probably isn't the coffee. It's likely poor sleep quality, dehydration, or an unbalanced diet. Coffee shouldn't be used as a crutch for ongoing fatigue. It should only play a small, supportive role in a healthy morning routine. Habit 5. Ignoring morning dizziness, fogginess, or loss of balance. Have you ever woken up and felt like something was off? Not pain, not fainting, just a bit lightheaded, unsteady, or mentally slower than usual. The most common reaction to those feelings is, "I must not have slept well." And then, people go on with their day as if nothing happened. But if you're over 60, brushing off those subtle signs could mean missing an important early warning from your body. When you wake up, your brain shifts from full rest to normal activity. During that transition, your circulatory system needs to stabilize to supply enough oxygen to the brain. However, if your blood vessels have stiffened with age, or if you have fluctuating blood pressure, the brain might not get enough blood temporarily, which can trigger symptoms like dizziness, mild numbness in your limbs, loss of balance, or slowed speech during the first few minutes of the day. This isn't just aging. According to the American Stroke Association, some transient ischemic attacks, TIAs, happen right after waking up, lasting only a few minutes and then disappearing completely. The danger. TIAs are the clearest warning sign that a major stroke could occur within the next few weeks if no changes are made in time. Not everyone who feels dizzy in the morning is having a TIA, but any recurring symptom, even if it only lasts a few minutes, deserves serious attention. If you feel something unusual when you wake up, even just mild dizziness, disorientation, numbness on one side of your face, or slightly slurred speech, don't just brush it off. Record the time, the specific sensations, and how long they lasted. Then share it with your doctor at your next visit. You can also use symptom tracking apps like Simple or Care Clinic to spot recurring patterns over weeks or months. And don't forget that those weird morning feelings could also be linked to poor sleep quality, dehydration, or medication interactions. All things you can fix if you pay attention. Your body doesn't lie, but it doesn't shout either. It whispers. And what you feel in the first 10 minutes of your day might be the earliest health bulletin you'll ever get. Habit 6. Taking morning medications the wrong way. If you take medications in the morning, and chances are you do, what matters isn't just taking the right pills, but taking them the right way. It sounds simple, but in reality, this is one of the silent reasons behind poor blood pressure control, unwanted side effects, or even increased risk of stroke in older adults. According to CDC data, nearly 90% of Americans over age 65 take at least one medication daily, and nearly 40% take 5 or more. With that volume, it's nearly impossible to avoid mistakes unless you have a good system in place. Here are some of the most common mistakes people don't realize they're making. Taking blood pressure meds on an empty stomach without enough water, leading to a sudden drop in blood pressure or poor absorption. Taking meds with coffee or juice, even though some medications should only be taken with plain water to be effective. Forgetting to take a dose, then doubling up later, which can cause wild swings in blood pressure. Taking medications that require food without eating anything, which can lead to nausea, fatigue, or digestive issues. Another major risk. Taking meds only when you feel like you need them, like thinking, "I feel fine today, I probably don't need this." That mindset is dangerous. Blood pressure meds, blood thinners, and cholesterol drugs don't make you feel noticeably different when you take them, but they work silently to keep your blood vessels stable and reduce the risk of stroke. To take your morning meds properly, here's what you can do. Use a pill organizer sorted by day and time: morning, afternoon, evening, to avoid confusion. Set reminders on your phone or smartwatch if you have multiple medications to take on schedule. Take your meds with at least 200–250 ml, about 8–9 ounces of plain water, unless your doctor tells you otherwise. Eat a light snack, like a slice of bread or a banana, if the medication needs to be taken with food. If you're unsure when to take certain medications, write down a list and ask your doctor or pharmacist to review it with you. A 5-minute conversation can save you from major problems later. Medications only work when taken at the right time, in the right dose, and under the right conditions. One mistimed pill can turn from protection into a risk. Habit 7. Delaying your bathroom trip right after waking up. A seemingly harmless habit that many people have, lying in bed for a few more minutes and holding in the urge to pee, might actually be putting quiet but real physiological stress on your cardiovascular and brain circulation systems, especially for older adults. You might wake up feeling the urge to urinate but still feel too lazy to get out from under the covers. So you grab your phone, check your messages, scroll through the news, or maybe wait until after your morning coffee before heading to the bathroom. It might not seem like it has anything to do with brain health, but in reality, holding in your urine too long after waking up triggers a stress-like response in your nervous system. Your body releases adrenaline and cortisol, hormones that help you stay alert, but also raise blood pressure, increase heart rate, and constrict blood vessels. This is the body's natural response to an overfilled bladder. In younger people, blood vessels are still elastic and can handle the pressure without much issue. But for older adults, this added stress on the heart and cerebral blood vessels, especially at a time when blood pressure already tends to spike slightly after waking, can be a risk factor for a transient ischemic attack, TIA, or even a stroke. Additionally, some studies, including one published in the Journal of Urology, have shown that a full bladder in the morning can temporarily trigger heart rhythm disturbances, particularly in people with a history of atrial fibrillation or weak heart valves. The combination of elevated blood pressure and irregular heartbeat increases the risk of blood clots, a direct cause of ischemic stroke. The solution is simple. When you wake up and feel the urge to urinate, go to the bathroom before doing anything else. Before your phone, before your coffee, even before taking your medication. Relieving yourself right away not only eases pressure on the heart and brain, but also helps your body rebalance its hormones naturally. If you've ever felt slightly anxious, tired, or flushed in the morning even without drinking coffee, you might be unknowingly delaying your bathroom trip. Think of this as your first act of self-protection each day. No tools required. Just the right habit, done at the right time. Now that you've learned about the 7 morning habits that can silently affect your brain health, heart, and independence, it's time to pause and ask yourself, how are you starting your mornings? A stroke doesn't wait for some big moment to happen. It builds up through small, repeated daily habits, not drinking water, getting up too quickly, taking medicine at the wrong time, holding in urine because you don't want to get out of bed. All of these seem like no big deal until they're the reason you end up in the hospital. But change doesn't have to be complicated. Pick one habit out of the 7, just one, and start tomorrow morning. Put a glass of water by your bed, sit up more slowly, take your medication on time. Even the smallest change is a statement that says, I'm still in control of my life. If this video made you stop and think, do one more thing. Share it with someone you care about. Your brother, sister, partner, neighbor, anyone you know who might be silently dealing with the same things. One click from you could be the timely wake-up call they need. And leave a comment. Be honest. What caught you off guard? Which habit will you change first? You never know, a stranger might read your answer and think, I should do that too. If you want to keep getting simple, useful tips that aren't overhyped or full of fluff, then you know what to do. Hit subscribe. Don't do it for me. Do it for yourself. Because every morning you live the right way today is the reason you'll live healthier tomorrow.